it's sometimes trying to figure out what's the story that you're putting out there, because we do have the ability to create solutions in a lot of different directions. And again, for me, everything is really intersected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that intersection is clear to everybody else.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And I am so happy to have time today with my good friend, Marti Grimminck. Welcome, Marti.
Thanks for having me.
A little bit of background. So Marti is a global business executive, social entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and futurist designer. She's the founder and CEO of International Connector, which provides generation insights and workforce development solutions. She leads projects for corporations and governments on future of work research and workforce development programs. She is known for her global and diverse reach, engaging young people across 190 countries. She has brought the amazing insights that her company provides to our Catalyst Leadership Trust community, because those insights are so valuable for us as Catalysts, thinking about how to create that better future. And we're so grateful to have her as an advisor in that context for the Catalyst Leadership Trust. So welcome, Marti. Let's start off with having you tell us a little bit about your journey, maybe sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of and how that may demonstrate your Catalyst nature.
Ooh, it's always a tough one on like where to start. And I think when I think about my journey, it's definitely always been that pace of a catalyst. Right. I'm always been jumping towards wanting to do 8,000 projects, or, seeing the solution in front of me that I just have to go and design and put forward. And so, although in my mind, everything has always been interconnected, that sometimes I think people are always like, how do you talk about, like, how do you have this project and this program and this social impact thing going on and that going on over there? And they don't necessarily see how they're all interlinked, but in my mind, it's like clear as day. So I don't know if that quite answers it, but that has always driven me, is finding interesting solutions and pulling others in and creating new projects or new businesses or new platforms.
I think just really quickly, I think it's super helpful for the audience, because it's like, you can feel seen, like, oh, there isn't a step-by-step guide to having my career. Like, I can sew together connect those dots. Sorry, Tracy, over to you.
And so it sounds like you're already beginning to help us examine this word. And so what does catalyst mean to you?
It's a great question. I mean, I think from my perspective, it's the person who can kickstart something and get something very action oriented, right? It's not just having the idea, but it's actually just taking those steps to make that happen. That's how I see it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an entrepreneur, right? Or that you're that person, or think that directional, but it is about making something happen and taking the steps to create a solution, to create a program, to create a company, whatever those pieces are.
And
that's how.
It makes perfect sense. In the book, we talk about the definition of catalyst, right? As someone who has the vision, but it's not the visionaries only. It's the people with vision that like can't stop themselves from tripping into action, which I'm hearing you say with even better words than we use. So I just love it. And so for you, how does being a catalyst support the journey you've had? And now you're at this executive level. What does that mean for you?
I think that's just how I've had to do business, right? Early in my career, I was in a different industry than I am now. I was a producer in entertainment. And so I was constantly building something from scratch, right? Getting new shows off the ground, new events, new productions, right? And at the highest level. And just being able to vision what a end piece would look like before you had any staff in place, like no actors, no creative team, any of that, and being able to take it all the way through really, I think was really aligned with how I work even today. But then moving into a business, I started working with companies and internally, but I realized that my energy level to just see something all the way through wasn't going to mesh. And then I was making life choices about where I want, like how I wanted to raise kids and how I wanted to work and continue to be at what level. And so for me, it was this very logical step to bring that all together as an entrepreneur and as like starting a business. And where I started with the business, it wasn't in the same intention exactly of where we are now, but we went along with the journey of what was coming along and what we were developing and the new programs and products and services that were coming about. So I feel like every step of the way of how I've worked and how our company has developed through the years has literally just been that catalyst journey. It was like, we're working on this, but we see this solution and this opportunity that people are asking us about. So let's move over into here. Even just we are known for our work, right, with younger generations. And even that came about in a catalyst way, right? We were working on impact programs with young people all over the world. And it was sort of at this height of the millennial craze, like companies trying to figure out what are they going to do with millennials. And it started with a phone call from somebody I knew that had seen our program and was wondering how we engage so many young people all over the place when they were losing millions on campaigns that they put out. And so the disconnect of like not understanding millennials and then the fact that we had engaged so many just really was what brought about all of our expertise in the market research and workforce development that we are doing today. So it's amazing how just those little conversations, I think, can have turned into next stages in our
And
work.
I love to Shannon's point, right? It's following what's emergent to lead you to the next thing, as opposed to some ladder that had to have been there to follow in your career. Thank you for sharing those moments. That's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, especially now with you as a CEO of the organization, the skills that you're articulating, like being able to see the vision, doing the sensing, a little bit of fearlessness. I don't want to say there's no fear, but like we're going to go take that first step and we're going to do it. And then the openness to like you get the phone call and you're like, that's not exactly what we do, but I can connect the dots and figure it. So I hear those are some of the catalyst superpowers that have helped you as an exec. What have been some of the challenges being an executive catalyst, and how have you dealt with them?
Oh my God, there's been so many.
One or two, Marty, one or two. We have a short time.
Is this therapy? No.
Yeah.
There, it actually, as much as there's a fear, like lack of fear in some ways, or, I will jump in 10 feet into it and go full force and know that we're going to get there. But I think it's been getting people along that journey, right? And having enough confidence in that ability to bring everybody on that journey. Which is different than knowing we're going to get there, knowing the vision, knowing the solution, and not just convincing people, but it's having the confidence to convince everybody that this is the right steps. So even the people who call you, right, you still have to take them on that journey, and you still have to take them to where this is and why, let them understand that, and get them embedded into the process too. So I think that is one. And I think sometimes as well that you can come up with ideas that maybe the market isn't ready for yet, right? We were talking about millennials, and as much as everybody was interested in millennials and all these products and ideas and programs came out of that, actually, I feel that what we were saying back then is more relevant, or people understand it more now as we start talking about Gen Zs than they did back then. And so, and it's not just because we've grown in our, in the number of years that we've been in business, but it's just, I think the market is more understanding it because they've seen the effects more and more. And so they understand where they're having problems in their workplace as a result of not understanding younger generations or bringing younger generations in, and those shifts and changes.
So fascinating. The first one is really interesting, the confidence, because, we can seem arrogant sometimes as we like, because we will believe so much, like you're millennials, we need to talk about this thing that is coming to people. And yet you get the call and it's a little bit tangential to what you do. And the word that came to me was the imposter syndrome. Because I hear you're like, I'm willing to jump in 10 feet, but I might not have ever done it before. So I'm just curious, like, how did you overcome some of those feelings, or how did you develop confidence over time?
I feel now that we just have such a body of work, and I think the work stands for itself now, but it is a challenge because I wasn't, even when we were doing something great, and even now I feel like we talk about maybe 1% of all the things that we're doing, right? And so, and I don't think that's lack of confidence now, but it's sometimes trying to figure out what's the story that you're putting out there, because we do have the ability to create solutions in a lot of different directions. And again, for me, everything is really intersected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that intersection is clear to everybody else. And so that, I don't know, over time, it was, how do I show the right examples of what we've done to show that the path that we're talking about is going to lead them in a new direction that they want to go, right? So pulling examples from our portfolio, but then also pulling the right data in. And that has built the confidence, I think, that I needed to say, no, we really do know what we're talking about. Like, come with us on this crazy journey, because you're gonna be really happy you did.
So how do you know which story or data to pull to land that with the customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really spend a lot of time listening, and listening to what, even though I've seen the repeat of a lot of the same problems over and over again with clients and with new, potential customers, I hear the same things over and over again, but I'm not making that assumption. It's like, I really need to listen to what they're saying, really understand the context of their company and what they're up against, or like why this is a challenge for them right now, and then start to piece that together. Because even though everything, like we have like repeatable products, but we also have really customizable things. And so I think it's fun to be able to take, I've heard this little dot and I've heard this and I hear this same challenge, but yet we can approach it slightly different. And that's for me, very exciting.
Yeah, it reminds me of something I heard yesterday. It's the difference between being being versus interested. It's like being interested in the person, because your work is very interesting, Marti. Like, and everyone should look at what you're doing because your insights are insane. The access that you have, it's so interesting. And yet, what I'm hearing you say is, I need to be really interested in the person who's in front of me to help me connect the dots.
And I think that's just how I work though too, right? I'm much more of a relationships person, and, for better or worse on how that is when you build a business. But I feel so strongly about the clients and the people in my network, right? And that I've built these relationships over a long period of time, and I value that, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's super important to understand what what the situation is and what they're talking about. And then, I also, whether they're asking me or not, I'm like, oh, I have this idea, or have you thought about this? And I'm like, oh wait, maybe I should step back and not throw in 8,000 solutions, but that's just also the nature of me.
And totally authentically you, totally. The other challenge that you brought up is also super interesting and kind of connected to maybe where you just ended, but you're like, it's there's this being the head of the curve. And so when you started doing this work, people were like, why are we talking about that? Who are millennials? What? And now, you are in a very hot spot where people are really looking for your insights, but it's not easy to be at the front end of that, especially when you're starting your own company and maybe feeling the imposter syndrome. Walk us through, like, what's your advice to Catalyst, or how did you overcome the challenges of being ahead of the curve for so many years?
I really enjoyed the work, right? So we just kept, we would, even if it was a smaller step, right? I was never afraid of taking a small step with somebody. And in fact, I still suggest that with people who are maybe not sure what they're going to get out of learning about younger generations. Like, you don't have to dive in completely, but I feel like just, take a little taste of what this is, and then evaluate it yourself and see where that benefit is. And I think that was what drove us further, right? Is that we were also watching that from our standpoint, right? We got bigger and bigger in what we were doing, and bolder in what we were doing, and more creative in how we were doing it, because we saw the value right away. And we saw the transformation among corporates that we were working with, right? That you could see the light bulb go off. And so seeing how they would change the way they were working based on what we were bringing to the table. So I think all of that, again, it was just the experience of building it, and building it with the right people, right? You
Mm,
can't necessarily build something. We were lucky. We approached people after, some people approached us. Then we went, okay, well, let's approach others to develop this further, but let's approach people that we can have a conversation with about this, right? Like, not everybody is going to get on a call and want to deep dive into like innovation conversations. But when you find those people who want to have those big picture conversations, it's pretty magical.
yeah.
And so how can you move that further and almost brainstorm together? And that's where a lot of the magic and the confidence would come.
Amazing. And one of the sort of a double click down that I'd love to get your opinion on, because I think you've been advising organizations, but there's like the pace of change is crazy right now. There's like the constant market and competitive shifts that are happening. There's this pressure for organizations to become agile and fast while also having to keep the lights on. All from your context, while they're dealing with like different ways that employees are showing up with these generational preferences. And I'm wondering if you have advice for organizations how to navigate kind of that the ambidextrous organization that they need to have with so many variables from an employee base.
I think they, gosh, I could say this in so many different ways. That's the pause here. I believe that they need to look at true like flexibility, and not just, oh, I can work at home today or I can work at the office. That's not really what I'm talking about. But how do you really start to think about a workplace and work loads, like what people are tasked to do, what their jobs are, in a more flexible way? Because you are dealing with a more transient workforce, right? You're dealing with a more spread out workforce, right? People are going to be at home. Some people are going to come in. Some people have never met because they're always virtual, right? And that shifts and changes how you lead an organization, or what happens with this, right? And now people are hiring in different parts of the world because they can, right? And that's a great thing, because you're bringing in these different perspectives and these different things. But it's also a hard thing, because you have to have a different style, again, of management or understanding what you're doing. So the more flexibility that you can create with your team and with your company, and thinking about flexibility in a creative way, out of the box way, I think is one area I would probably sit on. And then starting to look at understanding the different ways that different generations work within the workplace. And you really do have differences, right? I mean, Gen Xers, and there's still some baby boomers in the workplace, right? So very different work style if you look at especially Gen Xers from millennials, and then millennials to Gen Zs. So I think understanding what each group brings to the table, and the way in which they're speaking, and initiating things, and their work styles, and then figuring out how to mesh that together. That and where the benefits are from the different generations can really add a lot to your your company.
I love the depth of that answer. Thank you for sharing that. It's, when we work with organizations, we're like, a one size fits all approach to change doesn't work. And that's like a top level thing. But I think, increasingly the insights that a one size fits all to any segment of your employee population doesn't work in the ways that it did certainly in our Gen X generation. So awesome.
Well, just to follow up on that, it really doesn't, because you have generations that are growing up with different sets of technology, right? And, when I grew up, I wasn't born into a world that had personalized computers or cell phones, right? And so that alone changed a lot, right? Then add in social media, then add in AI, right? These are really distinct shifts in the way in which younger generations socialize, and the lens that they bring, and the tools that they use. So you can't necessarily mesh that with how the other generations, think, and again, like, put a lens on how they start something. So you really need to think about the differences and how that affects what you're setting up in your company.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to continue to mine you for this amazing wisdom. So turning, from helping organizations and thinking about your peers at the executive level, catalyst peers, in our journey as catalysts, right? There's a lot that we learn that open up the opportunity to be there. Or said another way, there are behaviors that catalysts can exhibit that can stop us from getting there. And so I would love to hear from you the wisdom that you've learned about what do we need to learn to be successful as catalysts in executive positions?
I believe it's, for me at least, and that's really the lens I can give you, is the communications side to it, right? Making sure that everybody understands the vision of it. So for me, though, I still struggle with that. And so it's easier for me to actually create something, put a shell in front of people. And I will 100% roll up my sleeves and be like building something on a website, or putting little programs together to show how the interactivity is going to happen, or something, right? Something to bring it to life, because that's how I think. That's how I can show others what it is. And if you can't show others what it is, or explain it in words, that's the skill that you need. You have to be able to do that. So I always see that endpoint, but I have to figure out all the images, or the pieces, or the something, the words, to bring everybody along. And so I think that is a huge skill that catalysts need.
From my world and background, we talk about that as the word is prototype, as you build a prototype. And so I'm wondering, what are the different ways that you have learned to prototype a vision that's not just words? So I'm hearing you coding, but what can that look like?
Yeah, it's funny, because I'm such the theatrical background, right? And I actually had a mentor when I was back at Tisch at NYU, and she said to me, she like stopped me because I was, having this moment of like, I don't know, couldn't articulate what it was. And she said to me, she's like, you actually think in pictures. I see it all the time. And she said, put the pictures down, like create the patchwork, and then fill in the gaps. And so it's funny, yeah, I don't necessarily say prototype, but for me, again, like I can picture it. So the picture is there and I have to patchwork it. So I use tools, like I love things like Canva and Miro that have allowed me, like I'm not a designer, so I've find, some tools that were always just too hard and I can't draw it. But once I got these types of tools, I can literally start to put things together. And that has helped me to create the frameworks or the pieces that I need to then help others see what I'm trying to say or create and build.
So your brain, not just pictures, but it sounds like you see the connections between pictures.
Yeah.
And so you're helping build out a process and a framework that you give to people to say, if this, then this, then this, then this.
Yes. That is probably more linear than the way I do it, but yes.
Well, it's interesting because we talk about vision broadly, right? This idea that it's an imagined destination. And so you're kind of creating this intermediary of like, okay, but you got to help them understand. And it sounds like you're helping them understand connections between and what it, might look like to help get there. And so it's a much more 3D rendering of something versus just saying one day we'll live on Mars.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
I love it.
I have to say, Tracy, I don't know if this will resonate with you, Marty, but you just held me connected dot, which is when I was a network engineer, I was introduced to the tool Visio, which is literally a system. So it's really before PowerPoint and anyone were using, but it was designing exactly for that. It was like system flows, forcing a system thinking, which I think is really interesting. Like, how do you surface systems thinking in a way that can bring other people along? I love that connection.
Absolutely. Shan,
right. You ready for the fun one?
Maybe. Let's see.
We'd love to hear, who are your favorite catalysts, past or present, and why do they stand out to you?
That is such a hard question. I think because I feel it's the patchwork stuff. Like, I don't know. I like pull things from different people in different situations. So I always feel like there's not like one embodiment, but I've always been amazed by the people who are doing, that are taking social good and combining it with business. So, I mean, that's just like a personal preference from my standpoint. And so I've always really admired that, as well as people who are really forging ahead on an innovative path. So that's not a specific answer, but those are the attributes that I get very excited about and seeing that happen.
And you are dedicated to supporting, I've witnessed that for years, which is just so lovely that you get to lean in to help people do more of that. Yeah, to our listeners, really, if you get an opportunity, if you're curious about re-envisioning your workforce and all of the beautiful insights, I can't say enough. We love having Marty's research in our Samudra and Catalyst Leadership Trust ecosystem, and our members always love having you and rave about what you bring. So thanks, Marti.
Thank you. It's really the youth. They say it like it is, so it's always great to have them there.
It is great to have them there. Totally. The reverse mentoring, we need more of it. To our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.
And if you enjoyed this episode like we did, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you have a catalyst in your life, hit the share button, send a link their way.